I'm gonna give you a suggestion that my therapist gave me. Maybe I should just quit. Even if I'm not good enough, that's not gonna stop me from going out and doing what I wanna do with my art. And you kind of get hooked on the attention and the praise. The cost of that success is getting more and more criticism. Shame, on the other hand, says, I am bad. Greetings, salutations, happy Wednesday. I am coming at you from the car today because my schedule got a little wonky. So I'm here waiting for my therapy session to start, and I figured what better time than now in order to chat with you about shame and stage fright / performance anxiety. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we do that, though, let me introduce myself really quick. My name is Laura, and here on my channel, I help performer types, artists, public figures, anybody who's trying to make a career in the spotlight, manage your mental health in order to achieve the success that you want in your career. It's a hard life out here for creatives and artists and anybody who is trying to leverage the attention economy. So I am here to support you in your goals. I am a graduate student earning my master's in counseling, and I went into this field because I have a background in art and like specifically performing arts, and I experienced firsthand how fucking hard it is to find success in this field of being in the spotlight, having all eyes on you. And I also witnessed a lot of my friends struggling with the same thing. It's a very competitive field to try to be in. It also, I think, attracts a certain kind of person who's already very like sensitive, and then you put somebody who's already very sensitive into a highly competitive field, and it takes a really specific kind of person to be able to succeed. You really have to be resilient and really believe in yourself even when nobody else around you does. We're definitely sort of at this like cultural threshold. There's a new class of celebrities compared to even just 20 years ago. Okay, I've been blabbing. Let's talk about shame and performance anxiety / stage fright. So if the issue is shame, then why do we call it performance anxiety? And why does it really feel like anxiety? Well, I would argue that it is still anxiety, but I think that this anxiety is a manifestation of shame. Before we get into that, we need to talk a little bit about the difference between shame and guilt. Guilt can be a very like productive pro-social emotion, right? Think about times that you've felt guilty. It was probably after you hurt somebody's feelings who you care about. Maybe you like stepped on your pet's tail and you felt guilty because you hurt them and you didn't mean to. Maybe you lied to a friend and you felt guilty for like deceiving your friend, not living up to your values if you value honesty. So all of these things, the feeling of guilt tells us that we've done something wrong according to our own like moral compass. And that's a good thing. We don't want to get rid of guilt. It's a really useful emotion, in terms of like giving us data about our behavior and whether or not we want to continue engaging in the behavior that produced the guilt. So basically, guilt says I did something bad. Shame, on the other hand, says I am bad. And I would argue, like, I mean, all emotions are useful if you allow yourself to feel them and you listen to the message that they're sending you about your behavior and your values, and then you adjust your behavior accordingly. But when the message or the feeling that you're sitting in says, I am bad, there's no action to be taken about that, right? Like if I, at my core, am a horrible person, then there's nothing that I can do to change that because it's a core me issue, right? Like I can go try to do things to like fix my self-concept by, you know, I could go out and get a partner, I could go out and get in shape, I could go out and make a bunch of money, but if I have a deep core wound of shame that still says I am horrible, then all of these external achievements will do nothing to fix the internal sense of shame that I feel. Shame is often something that we inherit from a young age. Oftentimes, like, our parents or our caregivers were taught that they were shameful, that they are bad, and they unknowingly pass that down. I think if you are socialized in that kind of family, oftentimes you're taught that the way to earn love and approval from caregivers is through things like achievements. And when you have that sort of internal core wound from a young age, it makes sense that you would probably be drawn to something like the performing arts, right? Because, I mean, especially if you are brought up in a family where it's like, you know, the way to get your parents or caregivers' attention and approval is to do things like, you know, singing for the family, or being on stage, you know, acting, dancing, just like being a spectacle. If that's the way that you learned to get attention and affection, it makes sense that you'd feel drawn to continue doing that in adulthood, and you kind of get hooked on the attention and the praise, right? Like, I feel like none of this is going to be particularly new. This is not news to somebody who has spent their life in the performing arts, that the applause, the attention can be fucking addictive, right? Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting because there are so many people out there who abhor the spotlight, right? So, it definitely points to some vulnerabilities amongst the type of person who loves the spotlight, which actually, like, I have a whole other video on that. I recently found a study in terms of cluster B personality traits in actors specifically. Really, really interesting study. I am gonna dig further into it before reporting back here on YouTube, but you know, stick around, hit subscribe if you want to see that video, because I think it's gonna be really valuable. But anyway, okay, shame. And actually this does go along with cluster B, because shame is usually a really common factor amongst people with cluster B personality traits, and the personality traits of a cluster B person come directly from trying to manage these overwhelming feelings of shame, these overwhelming feelings of, I am bad, I'm not good enough, so therefore, like, I need to make myself larger than life, I need to make myself perfect so that nobody can ever criticize me again, and maybe I can start believing that I am not a terrible person. So let's return to the topic of performance anxiety / stage fright. I was recently talking to somebody who is doing research on this very topic. So the science may not end up supporting this hypothesis, but when she was describing it to me, it made a lot of sense, both in my own experience and in observations that I've had of others who are in the performing arts, and specifically who struggle with performance anxiety. The reason why she believes, and I believe, that performance anxiety is actually shame is because performance anxiety does not respond the same way that other forms of anxiety do to treatment, which is to say exposure, right? The gold standard for treating anxiety and OCD and like other anxiety related disorders is to expose yourself gradually to the thing that makes you anxious. So for example, if you have a phobia of dogs, let's say, the only, like the most effective way to get over that anxiety about dogs is to slowly, gradually expose yourself to dogs. I might start by imagining a dog in my head and just sitting with that like mental image of a dog until I can get my body to regulate itself from this like heightened anxiety state back into a more calm, regulated state. Then once that mental image of a dog no longer kicks up the anxiety, then I can kind of bump it up to maybe looking at a picture, like a real picture of a dog, and do the same thing. Keep looking at that picture of the dog until I bring the temperature from here down to here. Then maybe I go to a dog park and I sit outside of the dog park like 100 feet away. So I'm here in physical presence with dogs, but I'm far away from them. And I can do the same thing, sit there until I've regulated down. Then maybe once that feels okay, I can slowly get closer to the dog park, or I can, start spending one-on-one time with a really calm, gentle dog. And then you see what I'm saying? So this is the process of like gradual exposure to something that gives you anxiety. This method of gradual exposure does not work with stage fright. In fact, you can be a wildly successful performer and still experience stage fright. I think of like Bo Burnham, I think is a really good example to me, right? Like he had a wildly successful career as a comedian, and he had to stop performing for years because he was having panic attacks on stage. He has a whole fucking song about it in his special on Netflix. And you would think that for somebody like Bo, getting more and more practice of being on stage should desensitize you to that panic, to that anxiety. It should get easier and easier if stage fright and performance anxiety behaves the same way as other forms of anxiety. But it didn't. It got worse and worse and worse for him, right? Like he got to the point where he was having panic attacks. He didn't start by having panic attacks. He developed panic attacks. So the fact that this does not respond the same way as other forms of anxiety is sort of our clue that anxiety is not the issue when it comes to stage fright / performance anxiety. I believe that it has to do with when you are pursuing a career in the public eye. If you're successful, you expose yourself to more and more scrutiny, greater and greater levels of people examining every little thing that you do. You expose yourself to more and more criticism, right? And if you already have sensitivities and vulnerability and sort of this pre-existing belief of I'm not good enough, and that's why I'm doing this stuff in the first place on stage, to try to heal that wound of I'm not good enough, I need applause, I need the feedback from others that I actually am okay. As you get more and more success, and the cost of that success is getting more and more criticism, that is going to make that problem that you're trying to solve even worse, right? Like if you're going out on stage to try to rewrite this narrative of I'm not good enough by receiving praise and applause from strangers, but then you end up getting criticism, and most likely the criticism is gonna sound exactly like that really shitty voice in your head who's beating you up all the time. It's only gonna reinforce that shame, right? And like the way that our brains work, we have a negativity bias, and this is our brains working properly, okay? If you find it easier to be negative than to be positive in your thoughts, that's a feature, not a bug. Like our brains are designed to do that because that supports our survival. But the downside is that when you are opening yourself up to being more and more visible, more and more public as a professional, and you're opening yourself up to more and more criticism, your brain is going to latch onto that criticism, especially when it's reinforcing negativity that already exists in your mind, sort of as a default state, right? So yeah, I think what this means is that the solution to performance anxiety is not just exposure. I do still think that exposure is part of it, but I think it's going to be more resilience and tolerating those feelings of shame. Tolerating the idea that maybe you aren't good enough. At least this has sort of worked for me, that like holding space and being okay in the emotion of maybe I'm not good enough. But even if I'm not good enough, that's not going to stop me from going out and doing what I want to do with my art. Going out and like creating the art that I want to create and putting it out for other people to experience. This video is getting a bit long and it has been a little bit rambly and I don't know how helpful it's been. But I do want to leave you with maybe a little bit of, not exactly advice, but something to try. If this notion is resonating with you, if you have personally found that like the more you're on stage, the worse you feel about yourself, I'm gonna give you a suggestion that my therapist gave me when it comes to performing, which is to try to reframe the experience from I am performing to I am simply sharing my art. I'm sharing myself. I'm sharing this thing that I've made with other people. And maybe they'll like it, maybe they won't, but like I'm just sharing this experience with people. And just like see how that feels. I had honestly kind of a similar trajectory as Bo Burnham. That's why he was top of mind for me. I really relate to everything that he talked about in Inside, his Netflix special. And I too took several years off from performing. And frankly, like I'm still not really performing. I did perform a few months ago with my Ariel Studios student showcase, and that was enough for me. I don't really feel the urge at this moment in time to try to revive a performing career, at least not the way that it looked in my past life, in my 20s, as like a circus performer and dancer and like doing gigs and stuff. But I would love to do public speaking, and that's part of why I'm here on YouTube, to practice this skill of speaking about topics that matter, hopefully offering something that's helpful to you, and practice the experience of being seen by others, and opening myself up to potential criticism, to potential disagreement, so that I can get better at handling those icky feelings of being like disapproved of being disagreed with by strangers. So, and the way that I'm doing that is by mentally reframing it from like, you know, oh, I need to be successful here on YouTube. Or if I'm not, then I'm a failure, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm just out here on the internet sharing some perspectives that have helped me and will hopefully help you. And I think that approaching your art that way, when I performed in the student showcase, it was the first time I performed in over 5 years. And so even though like it was low stakes in that it was in a familiar environment, the audience was all like people that I know and who love me and have like seen what I'm capable of. Like we take classes together, you know, like it was the lowest possible stakes a performance could be. And yet I was nervous, but like reframing it from like, oh, I'm performing and it's like this, you know, it's my comeback performance, to I'm just like, I made some art and I'm sharing it with my friends, you know. I made some art and I'm sharing it with the friends of my friends. And I was just so grateful for that reframe, because it really, really helped me manage the anxiety, manage the thoughts of like, ugh, maybe I should just quit. Maybe I'm not ready to do this actually. To say like, no, bitch, like, you know, you put in all this work, you didn't come this far to only come this far. And like, I also sort of felt this like duty of, I owe this art that I made. I owe it the opportunity to be seen and witnessed and experienced by others. And I'm so glad that I did. You know, like the feedback that I got from everybody in the audience was just overwhelmingly positive. Like I got so many people saying like, I was so moved by that act, and, you know, and that was just really awesome, because I felt really moved by the act too, you know, the experience of getting out of my own way to be able to do that, even in a really like small, intimate, low stakes environment, was just huge. It was a bigger accomplishment than getting into grad school, to be perfectly honest with you. So yeah. And I think the key for me to be able to get out of my own way, to be able to do that, was years of working with shame and getting more comfortable with shame, transforming shame into something more productive. Yeah. So letting it hang out with me, but not letting it drive, not letting it make the decisions of how to proceed with my life. So I realize that this is a bigger task than what I can address in a single YouTube video. If you've made it this far into the video, I would love to hear your feedback. Definitely hit the subscribe button, like the video if you like the video, but leave me a comment in particular if you would like me to explore this topic further. I'll definitely come back when I get news from my friend's study to see if her findings agree, like if her hypothesis is supported, because that'll just be really, I think, pretty groundbreaking research in how we address performance anxiety for people who are pursuing careers in the spotlight, like you and me. So, okay. Shut up, Laura. Goodbye.